Welcome to part 3, education, affirmative action in education. Now this should be the biggest section for you. For me, when I was reading this in the book, this is, out of everything, what gave me pause, because I have personal experience with that. Oh yeah, I was in college and that was at my college and I didn't think about that. I'm going to get into what exactly I'm talking about right now, and it doesn't actually make any sense at all. And it's contrary to the argument for affirmative action. And as we go down, there's one example specifically which kind of makes you sick to your stomach. So let's jump into it. Now, education. If accepting less qualified blacks is positive, so we're assuming that everything in the book is true and blacks are less qualified based on their SATs, but regardless, it's a positive in the name of diversity. Okay, so if we're assuming that's true, then why do universities segregate residences, student residences, by color? In West Leyland, which was an example in the book, they have Malcolm X floor, women of color, Asian American, and La Casa for Latins. And for me, when I went to University of California at Santa Barbara, there was a black floor and there was an all women's floor. And I didn't think about it at the same time, but now it doesn't make sense. So this section in particular, and if you're new to tuning in, this is a 6 or 7 part series. I haven't decided. And there's an introduction to the introduction. I want you to go look at that first for sure before you watch the rest of this video. But if everything is about diversity, then why were these kids, black kids, separated at University of California, Santa Barbara? I don't. Comments, please. Comments. I'll see you down there. Now, in 1996, an unexpectedly large class of freshmen arrived, and the university assigned 9 white students to the empty spaces in the Malcolm X house, but the black students objected to living with whites, so they put them in the basement of the philosophy building. Now, Stanford, like many American universities, like University of California, Santa Barbara, and probably all the UCs, separate freshman orientation programs and graduation ceremonies for blacks, for Hispanics, for Native Americans, and for Asian Americans. Again, so we're arguing for diversity, but it's not always good. For freshman orientation, for graduations, for housing, it's not okay. But for school, it is okay. This, again, is the point of the whole thing, which made me start questioning things. Okay? Now, hypocrisy is arguing in favor of diversity, but teachers themselves of educational institutions are almost entirely of one political identity. This was also quite interesting. In 2002, a study was conducted of the political parties with which professors at representative universities and colleges throughout the U.S. were registered. Most, between 5 and 10%, were Republican, the right side, conservative, and 90 to 95% were liberal Democrat. And that is true with my own personal anecdotal experience. In fact, I remember in 2004 when Bush won, one of my teachers took an entire day, and at this point I was not politically active at all. Not that I am now, but then I didn't know anything. And he took an entire day to explain why the election process was wrong. And the other person, whoever it was, who was a liberal, the Republican one, the liberal, this teacher took a whole day to argue why the liberal should have actually won. Now, there was a study of the political orientation of graduation speakers over a 10-year period of 32 colleges, including Ivy League colleges, found that liberals spoke at 252 graduations and conservatives at 15. At 22 of these colleges, 177 liberals were invited, while 0 conservative voices were invited. Now, no matter if you're conservative or liberal, you should not be okay with this. Again, if you're a proponent of affirmative action, which is the whole point is diversity, then no matter what your political affiliation is, you shouldn't be okay with this. You should still want some balance. You're arguing for diversity after all in one realm. It should really be in others. And if it's not, please tell me why that might not make sense in certain aspects. Now, as it relates to SATs, SATs predict academic performance, says the author. Now, here is an argument in favor of SATs, which they were invented in 1926. In 1930s, Harvard gave scholarships based on SAT and the amount based on students' needs without regard to ability to repay it. Almost all went to poor students. Of the 10 first national scholarship recipients in 1934, 5 were summa cum laude, 3 magna cum laude, 2 cum laude, and 8 were pi phi beta kappa. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. I just know academically they were superior than most students. SATs, MCAT, and even undergraduate GPA predict college performance and real-world professional success. Among medical students, 49% minorities, 80% of which were black, eventually became board certified, compared with 80% of whites and Asians. Now, the whole point of this is their tests would predict their success later, and this argues for that conclusion. Family income is not a factor for how they do on SATs. Children of wealthy, highly educated black parents who attended upper-class suburban or private high schools do worse than the children of poor, uneducated white and Asian parents who attend slum schools. Personally, I do remember hearing that the SATs were racist in how they were created. Nowadays, now I didn't know why exactly, but after reading this book, I know why. Nowadays, culturally biased SAT questions have been totally removed for more than 4 decades now. And all new questions are examined by experts in American language and culture. So in other words, something might be phrased one way and interpreted differently by a white and black student, letting the white student answer correctly at a higher rate and the black student answering incorrectly at a higher rate. That's the whole thing why it was created racist in the past. That has been corrected for. Any questions that might have even a remote possibility of cultural bias are removed. And as a result, in fact, SATs are massively biased in favor of blacks as the scores overpredict their success in college as compared to whites. Additionally, SATs overpredict minority college performance, which is counter to the common sentiment that minorities do worse on the test. And this is because minorities score lower, and lower scores for all races overpredict college performance. So the lower you score in the SAT, it's going to overpredict your actual college performance. The higher you score in the SAT, the overprediction corrects for itself and comes down. Acceptance. Now we're moving between SATs, taking the test, now acceptance. The next section will be during college and after college. So we're now at the acceptance part of education and affirmative action. There is a slight edge lie, whereas blacks are given a slight edge. Location 3554, this is from. When the Dean of Berkeley Law School said only edge was given to 2 equal students, slight edge was only given to 2 equal students, but when admission records released, it was clear that this was a lie. In the 90s, people and organizations started using the state's Freedom of Information Act to force universities to disclose its admission records, where they saw that blacks were accepted at a higher rate with lower GPA and test scores than whites. Stephen Carter did not indicate his race and was denied because he was assumed to be white because his grades in SATs were so high. This is location 3713, which I'm going to read now. But at the time, one black applicant, Stephen Carter, did not indicate his race, and for reasons he explained below. Harvard's Law School Admissions Office assumed that he had to be white, and so did not check on his race and rejected him. As a senior at Stanford back in the mid-1990s, I applied to about half a dozen law schools. Harvard rejected me. Then within days, and these are Stephen Carter's words, then within days, 2 different Harvard officials and a professor contacted me by telephone to apologize. They were quite frank in their explanation for the error. I was told by one official that the school had initially rejected me because we assumed from your record that you were white. Stephen Carter, the white male, was not good enough for the Harvard Law School. Stephen Carter, the black male, was not only good enough, but rated agonized telephone calls urging him to attend. And Stephen Carter, color unknown, must have been white. How else could he have achieved what he did in college? In 2000, Michigan admitted all black applicants with LSAT scores between 159 and 160 and undergraduate GPA of 3.0 or higher, but only 22% of Asians and whites with a GPA of 3.25 to 3.49 and an LSAT score of 164 to 166. Now, how we know that was data was released unwillingly during the Grutter versus Bollinger case. That's location 3537. Now, there is an argument that non-academic criteria is looked at in order to accept more blacks, because remember, academically they're lower. So this is from location 3468. In Shape of the River, they don't provide any data on this at all. They don't cover it throughout the book at all, even though the book is chock full of charts and tables. During college. Blacks benefit from grade inflation. Now this is very surprising. I actually have to read this part to you in the book. Location 2505. Now there was a study asking 92 whites to grade papers in college. Even without conscious intention, blacks receive much higher grades than whites for the same work. Kent Harbour, 1998, wrote a large number of essays that he filled with errors in grammar and content. He then asked 92 white college students to act as markers and gave each one essay, along with a brief description of its assumed author, and indicated the author's race indirectly but clearly. For example, it would say the student is a member of the Black Student Union. The markers' average rating on a scale of 1 to 7 for content of the essays they thought were written by blacks was 3.5, but 2.7 for the essays they thought were written by whites. 46% of the markers wrote comments on the essays they graded. The favorableness of the written comments on a scale of +1 to -1 was +5.7 for the essays they thought were written by blacks and -0.4 for the essays they thought were written by whites. The markers were told that the authors would get their essays back. Some markers wrote on the essays that they thought were written by whites with comments such as, "When I read college work this bad, I just want to lay my head down on the table and cry." Such negative comments were never written on the essays supposedly written by blacks. On the contrary, many markers wrote on essays they thought were written by blacks how much they enjoyed reading them and how much potential they showed. Harbour repeated the same experiment with 103 different markers. Markers are graders. Their pattern of rating and comments was identical. So this was quite interesting, and it goes completely against the argument that blacks get worse grades in school, even though it apparently, based on this study and this author's highlighting of the study, they have grade inflation. There's also a notion of institutional racism, and that's the reason why blacks drop out at a rate 3 times higher than whites. Now, the author went into, he discussed the University of Michigan, who has over 100 diversity programs. They have an aggressive outreach program for minority students that begin when they're in elementary school. They have summer workshops for minority students. They have constant monitoring of these minority students, and they reward departments on the basis of their diversity records. The school, University of Michigan, brought 30 minority students to the campus at a time for 6 weeks during the summer, where representatives from 30 business schools tried to persuade them to enter doctoral programs in business. The university paid all travel and living expenses and $2,500 stipend to each student just for showing up. Now that is location 3521. The thing that I thought when I read this was first how when I was in middle school and high school and college, I didn't have any of these programs. At least I wasn't made aware of them. Maybe I had to go and seek them out. However, when I graduated college, my good friend invited me to, I'm not sure how to describe it, but it was similar to how this, except for hiring for companies. So we went and we attended for 2 or 3 days, stayed on a college campus, did some really hands-on workshops as it relates to resumes and everything. And then at the end, there was companies there to hire these students. Now, I already had a job. An auditing firm hired me. And well, what was interesting was when we were in the resume review period, I was told that my resume just wasn't very strong. And so I thought this was strange because I already had a job, but they didn't know that. But nevertheless, me and my friend, it was for minorities for sure. Me and my friend were the only white people there. But it was like the most hands-on, cool kind of a workshop learning environment that I'd ever been to. The quality of the school is not a factor in success. Now, this is in a location 1754. I'm just going to abbreviate it. There's something called the KSMSD Experiment. You can type it in on Google. It was in 1993 in Missouri, and it was a program basically designed to get minority students in school, the best schools, so the best teachers with good grades, graduating at the same levels as their peers. Huge experiment. It cost $36,111 per student, of which there were 36,000 students. The Economists showed almost 200 econometric studies have come to the same conclusion that students' performance is unrelated to the quality of the school they attend. So this experiment was shut down because it just didn't succeed. The grades of the minority students were the same and lower than whites, regardless of this experiment, which was designed to make it go higher. So it was canceled. Now, upon graduation, 3 times as high a proportion of affirmative action applicants failed to graduate than whites. Location 3310. For those whose pre-law school academic index was 720 or higher out of 1,000, the first-time bar passage rate was 97%. For those whose academic index was 540 or lower, the first-time bar passage rate was 8%. So this is saying before they went to law school, what predicted their success best was that grade that they got before law school. What predicted their success after law school, the test they took after law school to become a lawyer, that first test predicted it best. And a higher proportion of blacks than whites don't complete law school. That concludes the education part on affirmative action. And next up is employment, followed by my critiques of the book, solutions of the author, and then the conclusion.